Leon Spinks had already lived through the kind of night that can define an entire boxing career. He was only 7 professional fights into his career when he walked into the ring against Muhammad Ali. Ali was the heavyweight champion of the world. He was one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet, a former Olympic gold medalist, a 3-time heavyweight champion in the making, and a man who had already fought some of the most dangerous heavyweights in history. Leon Spinks was supposed to be the underdog. Instead, 15 rounds later, the impossible had happened. Spinks had beaten Muhammad Ali by split decision and taken the heavyweight championship of the world. It was one of the greatest upsets boxing had ever seen. But the strange thing about Leon Spinks wasn't simply that he had beaten Ali. It was what happened after. Because Spinks would go on to share the ring with several dangerous heavyweights, including men who possessed the kind of power that could change a fight with one clean punch. And years later, when he was asked to identify the hardest puncher he had ever faced, Leon didn't give the answer people might have expected. He didn't immediately name a famous knockout artist. He didn't point to the man who had knocked him out fastest. Instead, his answer was remarkably simple. He hadn't found him yet. That makes Leon Spinks' story much more interesting, because there were fighters in his career who gave him very good reasons to choose them. One of them was Gerrie Coetzee, and what Coetzee did to Spinks happened so quickly that there was almost no time for Leon to respond. On June 24, 1979, Spinks traveled to Monte Carlo to face the undefeated South African heavyweight in a scheduled 12-round WBA elimination bout. Leon had already fought Muhammad Ali twice. He had won the first fight and lost the rematch. Now he was trying to rebuild his position in the heavyweight division. Coetzee was 21-0. He was unbeaten. He was younger, and he was coming into the fight with a reputation that was growing rapidly. Spinks started aggressively. That was typical of Leon. He wasn't interested in standing at a distance and waiting for the perfect opportunity. He wanted to close the gap. He wanted to make the fight physical. He wanted Coetzee under pressure. For a brief moment, it looked like that strategy might work. Then Coetzee found the opening. A right hand caught Spinks behind the ear. Leon went down. He managed to get back to his feet, but the damage was obvious. There was no long recovery period. Coetzee immediately came forward again. Another right hand sent Spinks down for the second time, and then came the final sequence. Coetzee fired a rapid succession of power punches, and Spinks was sent stumbling across the ring before crashing into the ropes and going down for the third time. The referee stopped the fight at 2:03 of the first round. Leon Spinks had suffered the first knockout loss of his professional career. 3 knockdowns, 1 round, just over 2 minutes. For a fighter who had gone 15 rounds with Muhammad Ali, it was a brutal demonstration of what heavyweight power could do. And the details make it even more striking. A contemporary account described Coetzee's right hands arriving in rapid succession. The first punch left Spinks badly affected, and the punches that followed finished the fight before Leon had a chance to recover. Spinks later said he remembered the first knockdown, but little beyond it. This was not a long tactical battle. There was no 15-round war. There was no time to slowly adapt. Coetzee found the target, hurt Leon, and never allowed him to recover. If the question is simply which opponent demonstrated terrifying one-punch power against Spinks, Coetzee has an obvious case. But Leon's career had another opponent who presented a completely different kind of danger. Holmes. By the time Spinks challenged Holmes in 1981, Holmes was already the WBC heavyweight champion and had established himself as one of the best heavyweights in the world. He was undefeated. He had an exceptional jab. He had a major reach advantage. And behind that jab was a right hand that could punish a fighter who stayed in front of him too long. Spinks entered the fight knowing exactly what he had to do. He couldn't allow Holmes to control the distance. So Leon did what Leon Spinks usually did. He came forward. He pressured. He tried to turn the fight into a physical contest. For the first 2 rounds, he managed to make the champion uncomfortable at moments. But Holmes was never out of control. Then, in the 3rd round, Everything changed. Holmes caught Spinks with a left hook. Leon was hurt. Holmes followed him toward the corner and began setting up his right hand. Then it landed. Spinks went down. He managed to beat the count, but he was badly hurt. Holmes didn't rush blindly. He measured him, and then the right hands came again. Spinks was trapped against the ropes, absorbing punch after punch. His brother Michael tried to get into the ring to stop the beating. Leon was barely able to defend himself. Finally, the towel came into the ring. The referee stopped the fight at 2:34 of the third round. Larry Holmes had successfully defended his heavyweight championship and handed Spinks another devastating defeat. What made Holmes different from Coetzee was the way the damage was created. Coetzee had exploded. Holmes had calculated. Coetzee's attack lasted only seconds. Holmes used his jab, his reach, his timing, and his accuracy before unleashing the right hand that finished the fight. It was controlled violence. And that distinction matters when trying to understand Leon Spinks' career, because there is more than one way to be a dangerous puncher. One fighter can possess overwhelming raw power. Another can have perfect timing. Another can create openings with speed and accuracy before delivering the shot that does the real damage. Leon had experienced all of those possibilities, and still, when asked about the hardest puncher, he didn't simply give the audience a name. That is the mystery sitting at the center of this story. Because if anyone had reason to remember a particular punch, it was Leon Spinks. He had been dropped 3 times in one round by Coetzee. He had been overwhelmed by Holmes's right hand. He had fought Muhammad Ali twice, and he had eventually experienced the kind of punishment that ends championship careers. Yet his answer suggested that none of those men had convinced him that he had finally found the single hardest puncher he had ever faced. Maybe that sounds strange, but perhaps Leon understood something that fans often forget. A punch is not simply measured by how much damage it causes. Timing matters. Distance matters. Whether you see the punch coming matters. Fatigue matters. And sometimes the fighter standing across from you can be dangerous without ever needing to knock you out. That is where Muhammad Ali becomes impossible to ignore. Because Ali wasn't simply another name on Leon Spinks' record. Ali was the man who changed Leon's life. Their first fight transformed Spinks from an inexperienced challenger into heavyweight champion of the world. Their second fight took the championship away. And years later, when Leon was asked about the toughest opponent he had ever faced, the answer was Muhammad Ali. That creates a distinction that becomes critical to this entire story. The hardest puncher is not automatically the toughest opponent. Coetzee demonstrated what devastating heavyweight power could accomplish in less than 3 minutes. Holmes demonstrated what happened when elite skill was combined with precision and power. But Ali represented something different. He forced Leon to fight 15 rounds. He forced him to solve problems. He forced him to deal with experience, movement, pressure, and the psychological weight of fighting the biggest name in boxing. And Leon later admitted something that makes that relationship even more revealing. He was scared of Ali, not because fear stopped him, because it didn't. He was scared, and he still walked into the ring. He was scared, and he still voiced for 15 rounds. He was scared, and he still voiced for 15 rounds. That is why the Ali story cannot simply be reduced to punching power. But before we get to what Leon himself said about Muhammad Ali, we have to understand the 2 brutal examples that came before it. Gerrie Coetzee showed Leon how quickly a heavyweight fight could disappear. Larry Holmes showed him how precision could turn power into destruction. 2 fighters, 2 completely different forms of danger. And yet, neither one gives us the final answer. Because Leon Spinks had already faced the man who would later become the most important opponent of his career. The man he had somehow beaten. The man who came back and took his title. The man Leon himself would identify as his toughest opponent. And the strangest part is that this man may not have been the hardest puncher at all. So why did Leon remember him above everyone else? Why did he admit that he was afraid of him? And if Leon truly believed he still hadn't found the hardest puncher, what exactly did he mean by that answer? To understand it, we have to go back to the night an inexperienced Leon Spinks walked into the ring against Muhammad Ali and somehow walked out as heavyweight champion of the world. Because that night tells us something about Leon that no knockout statistic ever could. And it may finally explain why the man who tested him the most was not necessarily the man who hit him the hardest. The story of Leon Spinks and Muhammad Ali really begins with something that should never have happened. A fighter with only 7 professional bouts was about to challenge the heavyweight champion of the world. Leon Spinks had won Olympic gold, but professional boxing was different. Ali had spent years fighting the best heavyweights alive. He knew how to control a fight. He knew how to survive pressure. And perhaps most importantly, he knew how to make an opponent doubt himself. Leon later admitted that he was scared. "I was scared, that's why." But fear didn't stop him. That was the strange thing about Leon Spinks. He could be intimidated and still move forward. He could know exactly how dangerous the man in front of him was and still decide to fight him anyway. Against Ali, that mentality produced one of the biggest upsets in boxing history. On February 15, 1978, Spinks went the full 15 rounds with Ali and won a split decision. The young challenger had become heavyweight champion. But the victory also created a problem that Leon would spend the rest of his career trying to solve. How do you beat a fighter like Muhammad Ali? Leon had found the answer once, but Ali was still Ali. 7 months later, the two men met again. This time, the championship was on the line, and Ali approached the fight differently. The first fight had shown him that he couldn't simply rely on reputation. Spinks was too aggressive. He was too willing to exchange. He wouldn't be intimidated into giving Ali an easy night. So Ali adjusted. Instead of allowing Leon to dictate the fight, Ali used his experience. He moved. He controlled the pace. He made Spinks work. And over 15 rounds, the difference between the two fighters became increasingly difficult to ignore. Leon had already shown that he could beat Ali, but Ali showed that he could adapt. When the final bell rang, the judges gave Ali a unanimous decision. The championship was back where it had started, with Muhammad Ali. For Leon, that loss mattered. But it wasn't simply because he had lost the title. It showed him what a complete opponent could do. A man didn't have to knock you out to make the fight extremely difficult. He could make you chase him. He could change his rhythm. He could force you to think while exhausted. He could make every round feel like a problem that needed to be solved. And that is exactly what separates Muhammad Ali from the question of pure punching power. Because when Leon was asked about the toughest opponent he had ever faced, Ali was the name he gave. Not Coetzee, not Holmes, Ali. And when Leon explained why, his answer was almost shockingly honest. He was scared. That one sentence tells us more about the first Ali fight than any statistic ever could. Leon wasn't saying Ali was the hardest puncher. He was saying Ali was the man who made him feel the greatest challenge. That distinction becomes even clearer when we look at what happened against Gerrie Coetzee. Coetzee didn't need 15 rounds. He didn't need to outthink Leon for an entire night. He didn't need to create a psychological chess match. He found the right hand. He hurt Spinks, and within minutes, the fight was finished. That is raw heavyweight danger. Larry Holmes represented another version. Holmes didn't simply throw punches wildly. He used his jab to create the distance he wanted. He waited for Spinks to enter range, and then he delivered the right hand with precision. That is controlled power. 3 fighters, 3 different problems. But Leon's answer about the hardest puncher still refuses to fit neatly into a ranking. Because the available interview evidence gives us something very unusual. When Leon was asked to name the hardest puncher he had faced, he said he hadn't found him yet. That means we shouldn't turn Coetzee or Holmes into fake official rankings. Leon never gave us a neat list saying, number 3, number 2, number 1. Instead, his career gives us something more interesting. It gives us candidates, men who demonstrated different forms of danger against him. And among those men, Coetzee and Holmes have some of the strongest cases simply because of what they actually did inside the ring. Coetzee put Leon down 3 times in the opening round. Holmes stopped him in the third. But Ali created something neither man could reproduce. He became the central chapter of Leon's life. The first fight made Spinks a champion. The second took that championship away, and the emotional weight of those two fights stayed with him. Leon had entered the first fight as an underdog. He had been expected to lose. He had even admitted that he was afraid. But by the end of 15 rounds, he had done what almost nobody believed possible. He had beaten Muhammad Ali. That victory wasn't built around one spectacular punch. It was built around endurance, aggression, confidence, and the willingness to keep fighting when the man across from you was someone you had every reason to fear. That may be the most important lesson in Leon Spinks' story. Boxing fans often talk about power as if it exists in isolation. How hard can a man punch? Can he knock you out? Can he put you on the canvas? But fighters experience power differently. A punch that drops one opponent might not drop another. A punch you don't see coming can feel more devastating than one you brace for. A fighter with average-looking knockout numbers can still possess frightening power. And a fighter who doesn't knock you out can still be the most difficult opponent you ever faced. Leon had experienced both sides. Coetzee showed him what sudden destruction looked like. Holmes showed him what happens when technical precision turns into punishment. Ali showed him what it meant to face a fighter who could keep changing the problem in front of you. And that is why Ali remains the most important name in this story. Not because Leon officially ranked him as the hardest puncher. He didn't. In fact, Leon's answer suggests the opposite. He said he hadn't found the hardest puncher yet. Ali's importance comes from another answer. When asked about the toughest opponent, Leon chose Ali. That is a much more meaningful distinction than it might seem. Because a fighter can hit harder than another fighter and still be easier to defeat. Another opponent can hit with less power but create more problems. The best fighters combine everything: power, speed, timing, experience, movement, ring intelligence, psychology. Ali possessed enough of those qualities to make Leon Spinks afraid before the fight even began. And yet Leon still beat him. That paradox is what makes their story so compelling. Leon wasn't fearless. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't the most technically complete heavyweight of his generation. But he had courage. And sometimes courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do while you're afraid. Leon Spinks walked into the ring against Muhammad Ali knowing exactly what he was facing. He knew the reputation, he knew the experience, he knew the pressure, and he still came forward. 15 rounds later, he was the heavyweight champion of the world. The victory changed his life forever, but it also created a strange contrast with the rest of his career. The man who gave him the most famous victory was also the man he remembered as his toughest opponent. The man who knocked him out fastest wasn't necessarily the man he feared most. And the man who hit hardest couldn't be identified with certainty. That is why Leon's statement is more revealing than a simple top 3 list would have been. He didn't pretend to know something he didn't know. He didn't choose a famous name simply because fans expected one. He said he hadn't found the hardest puncher yet. And maybe that was because, after everything he had experienced, Leon understood that the hardest punch isn't always the most important thing. A punch lasts a fraction of a second, a fight can last 15 rounds, and an opponent can stay with you for the rest of your life. Muhammad Ali did. Leon Spinks would eventually continue his career, winning other fights and experiencing other losses, but nothing could match the historical importance of those 2 nights against Ali. The first made him champion, the second ended his reign. Together, they created the defining rivalry of his career. And when Leon looked back, he didn't need to exaggerate what Ali had done. He simply called him the toughest opponent. That was enough. Because Leon knew the difference between being hit hard and being tested completely. Gerrie Coetzee tested his ability to survive devastating power. Larry Holmes tested his ability to withstand precision and sustained punishment. Muhammad Ali tested everything else. His courage, his endurance, his confidence, his ability to adapt, his belief that he belonged at the highest level of boxing. And that may be why Leon Spinks's answer about the hardest puncher remains so fascinating. There was no convenient name, no perfect ranking, no simple explanation, just a fighter looking back on a career filled with dangerous men and admitting that he still hadn't found the one puncher who stood above them all. But he knew who had tested him the most: Muhammad Ali. And perhaps that is the real story behind Leon Spinks's career. He didn't become famous because he avoided the biggest challenges. He became famous because he accepted one that almost everyone believed he would lose. He was afraid. He walked forward anyway. He fought 15 rounds, and he beat Muhammad Ali. Years later, that remained the clearest proof of what kind of fighter Leon Spinks really was. Not the hardest puncher, not the most technically gifted, but one of the most willing to step into danger and discover what happened next. And when the question became, who had pushed him the furthest, Leon didn't need 3 names. He needed only one: Muhammad Ali.